Well, our next guest, we're welcoming back to the stage, Rock and Mr. Phil Hahn, who are actually going to talk us through what the overview of what is AFWERX. Because honestly, there's some partners out there who've probably said, man, heard a lot about it, but I'd love to know what it is. So welcome to the stage, if you will, please. Rock and Mr. Phil Hahn back to the stage for us to give us those overviews. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, I just want to start off by thanking everyone, thanking Capital Factory, General Pringle, General Holt for being here. We understand the threat that we all have, and I think it's very important to address a little bit of the history behind how we are addressing that threat at AFWERX and SpaceWERX. To start off with, I guess the question, right, that I think a lot of people want to know that don't understand or really know where SpaceWERX came out of. So I guess why SpaceWERX is definitely a question that we'll raise up, but a little bit about the history of AFWERX and how we got to the stage that we're currently at, and a little bit of where we're going to go in the future. AFWERX started back in 2017 with this idea of innovation. How do we do things better, smarter? How do we get to the airmen and really develop some ideas and strategies to attack, national defense and some of the issues that we're seeing the whole way down to the airman level. So when we transitioned to, and they did an amazing job creating a brand, right? I mean, when we say AFWERX now, it means something. And so with that piece, that brand, our Spark division kind of came out of that. So we're going to have the Spark division chief here earlier, so I will let him go into additional detail on that. But in 2020, when we brought in a additional number of startups, basically here in the Air Force, we had AFWERX, which is attacking the problem, utilizing our SBIR and SITR process, utilizing a new idea of how we can fund these solutions with the open topic. And again, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then our prime division. So the three basic divisions that first started AFWERX, Spark, the innovation at the airmen, AFWERX, providing the funding solution, and then how do we get over this valley of death in the acquisition process, which is the prime division, looking at these larger bets that we can do. So since we've combined all of those together, we've really looked at, in the last several months, of how do we continue to fuel this engine that we have. And so we've incorporated a couple more divisions that deal with the financial aspect of it, that deal with the contracting aspect of it, that deal with the operations of we have all these mission sets, but how do we tie that all together and develop the tools and the technical solutions in the back end to really get after bringing in the commercial sector, bringing in the private sector, bringing in the VCs. So thank you all for being here and having that interest. And that just speaks to the fact of what AFWERX has done in the past to, again, build that brand so that we can be at the stage where we are right now to connect those dots and get things to the warfighter. So that's a little bit of the history of where we're at. And as we have seen more and more in the Space Force being developed. So I'll kind of transition there. So Rock, why SpaceWERX?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So first off, it's great being on a stage with Phil Hahn here. This is sort of like our deputy's corner. Phil and I, we talk multiple times a week. So we're going to try and not gripe about complaints about working internally into the system. But so why SpaceWERX? So I'm a career acquisitions program manager. 18 years. In the Department of the Air Force, recently transitioned to the Space Force. But as an acquisitions program manager, I was given this job title of innovation. So I was asked to get out and innovate. And, as a career program manager, I don't know a thing about innovation. I just know how to build programs of record, right? So trying to understand, what's going on in this ecosystem, how I can drive innovation throughout the Space Force, AFWERX immediately popped up. And so I have to admit, SpaceWERX came about, simply because you had a group of us that were fans of what AFWERX was doing. So we're trying to figure out how can we take the AFWERX tools and bring them to the Space Force. So it really started with the Air Force Pitch Day back in 2019, March of 2019. There was a group of us there. I was in the audience with a space operator, lab engineer from AFRL, and we're sitting in the audience, and we're looking at all the excitement, all the great tech that's coming through the pipeline. We're like, how can we get involved in this? So, amongst our group, no kidding, we went to the bar later on that night, and we scribbled on the napkin, how can we take this pitch day model, and we're competitive, right? How can we take this pitch day model in New York and make it better? So, so ideas were thrown around, and we're like, okay, we're going to take this on. We're going to get after innovation. A lot of innovation is going out in the commercial ecosystem. How can we take advantage of that? So we said, all right, let's do this pitch day our style, our way. So November 2019, we executed our own Air Force Space Pitch Day. So there was a lot that came out of that. We introduced our PEOs, our acquisitions decisions makers, to the SBIR portfolio as a strategic investment tool out of that pitch day. But leading up to that pitch day, we did this thing called customer discovery, where we onboarded roughly 70 companies into our pitch day pipeline, and we had Sherpas to help guide them to understand their value proposition. So going through pitch day, we had enough funding for 30 companies, and we didn't expect 30 companies to be awarded. But when our PEO saw that the companies came with real value proposition, and that they really spoke to some of our most challenging needs, they awarded 30 out of 30 companies. So it was at that moment where, our chief Space Force decision maker said, this is something that we need. This is something that we need to continue to do, because our top line, budget numbers is going to remain stable over the next few years. So how do you begin to inform, the next generation space architecture? It's through this SBIR open topic. It's through seeding the investment, with the startup community to understand, what's in the realm of the possible, especially if the majority of investment in R&D is coming through the commercial pipeline. So taking those lessons learned from the AFWERX team, bringing it to the Space Force, introducing it to Space Force leaders, and Space Force leaders, along with Dr. Roper at the time, committing to being involved in this innovation ecosystem and committing to standing up the SpaceWERX organization. That's why there's SpaceWERX. So it's no different from AFWERX. We're continuing to leverage the AFWERX tools, but I'm competitive. I'm seeing how I can continue to push the envelope a little bit more to bring capability to space operators and end users out in the field.
And as we have seen, and since the SpaceWERX launch, in the portfolios that have been coming through the door, we've seen the importance in space, the importance in jumping out and attacking that as its own sector, and so bringing in the capability of a dedicated SpaceWERX has been really good to partner. And as Rock has said, we talk through a lot of the lessons learned from AFWERX. If you can imagine, there's a lot of startup companies out there. Imagine doing a startup inside the Air Force, inside the government. It's not easy. And then you add multiple startups, which is really what we've been able to kind of combine together. In the bureaucratic nature of the government, it's hard, and there's unique problems there that we have to address. There's the tools, there's the back end, and a lot of the conversation that we've had collectively between the two works here is, what can we continue to leverage and what can we continue to bring in so that we're doing this in a cost-effective manner without additional redundancies, without additional. Manpower is scarce, and the level of technology expertise that we need, and the level of expertise across the board of understanding the commercial sector, of understanding how you talk to VCs, of understanding how do you even go through requirements that may or may not be generated yet, but there's this really cool whiz-bang solution out there that some small business, some company is already working that'll solve all these problems. And so how do you collectively bring all of that together is what we continue to try to solve and continue to try to perfect in the Air Force and really across the DoD. And AFWERX has really become that engine of how do we bring that network and those conversations together, and bringing on the Space Force and SpaceWERX into that ecosystem has just been a no-brainer, but we're trying to continuously improve and continuously do it as smart as possible, leveraging and sharing those tools.
And Phil, one thing I want to add is another chief partner in this ecosystem for us is really the investment network, the investment community. So the conversation has scaled up from the startups to pull in the investor community to have a more proactive dialogue about where we're driving both the Department of the Air Force architecture and the Space Force architecture. And so, I say dialogue because dialogue is key, because there's going to be requirements that we drive, but we need to understand, if those are the right requirements that we need to tackle now. If there are key spaces that there's already a ton of progress in, that's where we want to drive some of our investment. But that starts with a dialogue. And so how do we, make sure that dialogue is ongoing? There are some things that we're looking at within AFWERX to get after that. So within the next couple of days or so, we're going to announce a cooperative research and development agreement that we made with a venture capital group, Embedded Ventures. And so, what that does is it gives us a framework to really have a, more, driven framework towards the right conversation that we need to have, talking about where we're driving the architecture and getting that feedback and helping us to understand where we direct investment through the SBIR portfolio, and optimally co-invest in building an industrial base, because as you heard General Holt, with the emergent threat, this is a dynamic environment where, we're not just talking about, the military piece of it, but the economic, diplomatic, and information piece. So how do we continue to operate and innovate within this dynamic environment? And so, truly exciting time. But it's we're just in the beginning. So so with that, Phil, as AFWERX and SpaceWERX continue to scale, what are some of the near-term things that we're getting after with AFWERX?
So I think focusing on how we can do things better, right? So we built the brand. I think the SpaceWERX brand is there as well, and that's something that we can kind of feed off of each other. The piece that we still need to continue is getting out to all of the companies that are out there, and we're continuing to work our software solutions on the back end. The operations piece is huge. As I said, we developed the an entire division that we're going to be staffing up to attack these problems, because they continue, right? We can do, and it's events like these. Again, thank you, to all of you that are here. These conversations that really was the genesis of what started AFWERX. Having something that is where people can just walk in off the street and that openness to have a conversation. That's what unlocks a lot of the innovation. That's what unlocks the transition of these technologies. It's taking that first step. So continuing to understand and utilize how we can lower those barriers of entry, and sharing that across the board, not just with SpaceWERX, not just with AFWERX, but with the rest of AFRL. We have an amazing partnership, and now that we're part of the research lab, right, it brings together all of these technical directorates and all of this expertise that we can continue to leverage to make sure that the technologies that do come in, we have a path that we can better transition. It's understanding the technology as it's coming in and really knowing what is the technology and where we can put it in the military complex. That is some of the things that I'm excited to continue to work on, is some of these software tools, some of the back end that we're doing, and then really unleashing the rest of our force in their specific divisions to just accomplish their mission. So it's really that enabling aspect that I'm really excited about with some of our software tools and data solutions that just allow everyone to do their job more effectively.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I'm excited about, and if you heard me speak before, I always talk about the warfighter and the operator, because that's who we do this for. It's hard to believe that a year ago I was deployed, and I'm in AOR, and I work in this technology realm, and I'm talking to a fighter pilot, and I'm like, it'd be great if we had like mesh network radios here. I knew a company. I talked to a company. I'm like, oh, you got some mesh network radios that we can just borrow and play with. The company was all about it, but it was difficult to get those radios in a AOR. It's not like it was unproven technology. For us, it was like true game changers, right? So, if we're fighting in a dynamic environment, I think we should have a dynamic, more agile acquisition system that will allow us to onboard, capabilities like that in fast order. A lot of what we're doing with AFWERX is, laying a seed for that, and creating that environment to, Phil talked about it. AFWERX started with the operator. So, continuing that relationship with the operators, is very important for us, and getting them involved, because when you talk to the operator, it's interesting. They'll tell you how to make their jobs easier, because we're trained to do our jobs very efficiently. But the game-changing innovation really comes from the dialogue that they have with you all within the ecosystem, because we have our one way of doing our job. But we need you all, again, to come and have the conversation with us on how we can do things better. And then you'd be amazed at how that conversation develops, over a short time period. Because now you're spitballing ideas between an end user, and on your end, you're understanding your value proposition. And the end user is getting even more excited, thinking about the next generation technology that they're beginning to inform. And so I love where we're driving AFWERX currently, with the basis being our Spark element. And so you're going to hear from Steve Lauver later on today, but Spark is very important for the AFWERX machine. And so getting that connection, to the operator is important. Leveraging our technical expertise from our lab engineers within AFRL to really understand, how that works is just as important as well. So there's a number of elements that really have to align within this ecosystem to really push the needle on getting capability out there. And AFWERX creates that platform for those major elements to be able to collide and truly innovate.
And that's where that's where the innovation comes from. That's how we can transition the technology is what is important at the end of the day, right? I mean, we can have these great ideas, but unless we have the platform and the capability to make those connections, which is again why AFWERX is here. That's what our mission is to provide that easier transition. You can look across the Air Force, across the lab at the technologies that are out there, and it just takes time to do that. And we're looking at how we can hack the system at any stage of the process, right? Because that's where, if we just leave it up to the government, if we leave it up to us and we don't bring in the commercial sector or the private sector, if we don't bring in those ideas and we don't create the path to do that, then you've heard all the threats from earlier. And I truly believe, unless we involve the entire industrial base, we shouldn't say weaponize the industrial base, but unless we bring in everyone together and do this, the game is lost, because China's playing the end game. I mean, at the end of the day. And so unless we start to address those issues from an economic standpoint, unless we start to address those issues from a data standpoint of just having all of the data, we've already lost before we began. And it's these, older processes that we just need to continue to address and provide solution sets to the warfighter, or we're not going to get there.
So Phil, we talked some about ventures when we talked about onboarding small businesses, startups, and interacting with the investment community, and we talked about leveraging Spark to get after our operators. In the beginning, you mentioned our prime effort as addressing the Valley of Death. And you've been involved with Agility Prime and some of the great work we did with Agility Prime. What are some of the initial lessons learned, some of the successes from Agility Prime that we can share with the group right now?
Wow. So I mean, Agility Prime, obviously, that was the first Prime. So I mean, that was kind of the genesis of the entire Prime division, and what follows that. So from there we've really developed, again, what the model should look like. And I know you probably have some additional exciting announcements later about getting into a space prime, where we're concentrating on, going over the Valley of Death and really getting some of these larger big bets out there. I know, just here in Austin, there's several players in the Agility Prime, and that's been a really great showcase to understand the dual use nature of this. If you look at just how the technology used to play in the past, where you get to the Valley of Death and it takes 3, 4, 5 years to put together an acquisition model to get, a new whiz bang aircraft, right? So if that is now cost prohibitive due to the fact of how long it takes, how long it takes to develop the technology, to develop the requirements. And then by the time we get there and we have something that we can hang our hat on, it's already old technology at that point. We can no longer go at the speed of the rest of the commercial sector. And so what I see the prime programs as is a way to not be a step function. We're working alongside with these commercial entities, and then when we need to transition any of those technologies into a much more military-esque application, we are working that alongside all of these commercial technologies as we're doing that. And that's the exciting part of this, is to see while we are supporting these other initiatives, while we're supporting these other companies, we can start to see and start to develop those requirements of when we can break off and say, this is a great example of an eVTOL, for logistics in the battlefield or something like that. But meanwhile, the commercial company has that in mind. We're partnering with things like airworthiness to get them into our labs, into our cybersecurity, and the stuff that the federal government and the lab and the Air Force is good at, right? We can do these one-off things, and bringing in the commercial partners, we help buy down risk for them. We help buy down risk for us, and then at the right stage, we're also working with requirement owners to develop what those requirements should be, and we can break off at the right time with the right technology and do it at the speed of the commercial sector that is needed by the warfighter now, instead of waiting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road in some of those projects. So we've already started to see that. We've already proved out a lot of the model with Agility Prime, and we'll be looking forward to see what's next with the Space Prime.
So the great thing I like about Prime is, Prime is a culmination of all the AFWERX tools, rolled into a single platform to really move the needle in a particular mission area. And so it allows us within the Department of the Air Force to send a strong signal on, a particular area where we want to innovate, and, not just innovate, but deploy technology, out to the field. And so Prime, brings together all the elements of riding the backbone of our SBIR open topic, and then really fast tracking the most promising projects through the process. So, you're talking about starting with the with academia through our STTRs, quickly, pushing them through the STTR process, and at the same time, firing up the SBIRs, and picking winners to actually demonstrate something within a 2 to 3 year period. And so Prime also allows us to align other programs such as strategic financing and tactical financing programs, again, to help us pick winners and get after that transition piece, get after, actually demonstrating something, right? So, so you move from just simply exploring to, laying a line in the sand, drawing a line in the sand and saying, we're going to cross this line, in this time period. So, that attracts not only people throughout industry, partners throughout industry, but it really does grab the attention of our Department of the Air Force senior leaders, because they know that this is a vehicle that they can use to get after some of their tougher problems and get after it in fast order. So, there's a lot of things that I love about Prime, and I'm so excited about Space Prime. And the Prime panel later on is going to be a hard-hitting panel where you can hear a little bit more about Prime and ask some additional questions for Prime.
Yeah. But it's really, and where I see this is it is a whole of government, whole of America approach to a lot of the stuff that we're trying to make these connections for. And it's not just for AFWERX, but now for SpaceWERX as well. And the different technology sectors that we end up diving into, I think across the board, we're just waiting for the next new company to walk through the door and say hi, introduce themselves, and see how we can make those connections with the technology. And so even in just the short time that we've been here today, and AFWERX has an office here at the factory, some of the conversations that we've already been having have been phenomenal to, again, continue to move the needle, because it really does come back to a unity of effort approach, because we can't do it by ourselves anymore.
Yeah, totally agree. And, there's been a lot of activity going on in this innovation ecosystem. A lot of groups, internal to the government is just as active as AFWERX within this ecosystem. How do you see, future interaction with those groups such as DIU, some of our partner services like within, Naval X comes to mind. How do you foresee like future partnerships with those groups and how we continue to function together in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so that I see that as again a big next step for a lot of what we're doing at AFWERX is again providing the connectivity across the board for all of this, right? Like we have great partnerships with DIU and Naval X and Army Futures, and it's really the connectivity piece that we're continuing to work. We have, all the folks that we have are dedicated to their mission, and we are dedicated to continuing to bridge that communication gap and making sure that when we're talking to a company, we can get them in the right hands of the DoD, because again, it comes back to winning and unity of effort. So that's something that we continue to work. How do we utilize the back end to make sure that the companies that are relevant can get to the right end stage? And that's I think the next step to where we need to be for AFWERX is providing a better landscape and a better runway for a lot of the companies that are coming in and partnering with AFWERX and with SpaceWERX as well.
Right. It's very interesting as you interact with other groups within the ecosystem. There's common names that come up, both, within the investor community, within, the startup community. There's, so if you look at DIU's portfolio of companies, their portfolio of companies is very similar to AFWERX. And so, it's not either or, it's both. It's all, right? Because, depending on where your company's at, each group offers a different tool for you to use to be able to come and partner with us. With SpaceWERX, as an example, we do have a DIU, lead that sits within the SpaceWERX office. On the military side, I know Kid and I rate on Captain Park, but she's full-time DIU. And the great thing about that relationship is we do share notes. We do talk about, how we can help companies throughout the ecosystem be able to continue to progress, because we're all in it together. Last week, I'm up in Seattle talking to NavalX, beginning to talk about some of our common challenges that we can partner on and invest in, to again, help startups, progress through our pipeline. So I love working in this environment because it's very collaborative amongst DoD organizations. Like, go up to the Hero floor, and it's just exciting to see, all the DoD partners on one floor. And the conversations that go on in that room, like, I'm kind of jealous that we don't have a Space Force Guardian that's in that room yet. And I say yet because it's something that I definitely want to explore to make sure that space is also in a conversation with all of our DoD partners about, how we can collaborate and partner.
Awesome. Well, hey, we do have some questions from online. Also, again, if you're here in the audience, please raise your hand, because we're entering into our Q&A session right now. So first, let's actually go online. So if you do have a question online, go ahead and put your question in the chat. If we don't mind, we'll pull it up here for your first question that was online there a second as they pull it up here. Okay. As they're pulling that up, actually, we'll go to the audience. Any questions? Raising your hand in the audience if there's any questions. Actually, here it is. Online. Where do you see the most opportunity for innovation from SpaceWERX and AFWERX perspective? Ready, go.
Most opportunity. Well, obviously space, right? I mean, space just starting up as we are looking at where we can better leverage each other. I know space is going to be a huge thing. With the Space Prime coming out here shortly, there's going to be immense opportunity from that perspective. But also the second and third order effects that are supporting those industries, right? We mentioned about microelectronics and some of the other things there. And really with the open topic, we're always looking for what that new innovation, what that new technology could be, and how we can better leverage that. I guess just some of the major efforts would be from the space perspective, but we're also looking at, additional challenges, additional colliders, and how we can, again, be that more connective tissue across the board. But if you want to talk through any of the SpaceWERX.
Yeah, so no kidding, Space Prime is going to be the nearest opportunity for groups to get involved. It is something that's supported by our Vice Chief of Space Operations, General D.T. Thompson. Is something that he's excited about. Our senior leadership is totally aligned with where we're trying to drive Space Prime. So that's our next near-term opportunity, and we're going to be super aggressive in that realm. Shortly after the Space Prime announcement, you're going to see, targeted activity that we're going to execute, on behalf of Space Prime.
Awesome. Great question. We have one more on chat, and then in here, if you don't mind, here at the Capital Factory, if you raise your hand, I'll get you next. Here online, they said, how do you bring DoD end user and customers to the table to connect with them, with solutions?
How do you do that? That's a great question for Steve. When Steve's back up here, not to throw it his way, but I mean, that's something, again, we're continuing to see how we can better utilize that. We're working in our operations division with some of the technology tools, obviously there that better leverage those things of how we make those connections. It's getting the Sherpas out there. I don't want to steal Steve's thunder for later, but it's really that kind of airman on the edge. How do we get the conversations going? How do we get the end user So it's continuing and perfecting these collider events. It's continuing the challenges. It's just better utilizing the system as we have it and breaking down barriers as we see them, and just continuing to improve on that process. Because on both sides of the equation, right, we in the government don't necessarily understand what the VCs are going through. We don't understand, the startups of the world and how they go through that. So it's really an education process on both ends of the spectrum that we have to get people in the same room, get people talking, to better understand that, so we can make the process better.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with Spark. Spark allows us to innovate on the operational edge. So our end users know what Spark is, and they're excited about Spark. Our end users, they're actually very proactive in standing up their own Spark sales. So it's exciting when I have a space operator email me directly and telling me, hey, I've started a Spark sale, I want to get involved. So that's not a top-down direction. That's an initiative that they started on their own, because they really see opportunity through the AFWERX SpaceWERX pipeline. And so it really does start with Spark. That conversation happens within Spark through our collider activities, through our Sherpa programs, through our Spark sales. So that's where the end user operator engagement starts.
Awesome. Last call for in here. Anybody here at the Capital Factory? Any questions? Raise your hand. Going once, going twice. Awesome. And real quick before we make that transition, that's one question I hear people say several times. So what is Spark? And this is going to be a question to transition into Steve. But just from your perspective, you mentioned Spark cells. Would you just take a second and kind of describe from your purview what a Spark cell actually is? And that'll be a perfect transition as we bring Major Steve Lauber in.
Yeah. So Spark cell is where our operators, our end users, really do engage with the ecosystem. It's where they, have their pain points, and they collaborate on, how to find out solutions or find solutions for their pain points. Those solutions can be internally built with Spark cells, but as the Spark cells and our operators are starting to discover, the SBIR open topic, they're becoming more proactive in reaching out to startups and small businesses. Within Space Force, we within our Delta, our Space Operations Center, they have what they call the Delta Innovation Group. The Delta Innovation Group is a type of Spark cell on a more scaled level that has direct support from the SPOC commander, Lieutenant General Stephen Whiting. This is a group that he has formalized to really get after innovation and actually champion innovative solutions for him to be aware of and advocate for on the back end. And so within that Delta Innovation Group, we have what we call combat development teams that's like directly attached to each of our space operations floor. The combat development teams, they're the avenue that communicate directly to me, what their gripes and complaints or their pain points are on the space ops floor. So when you see an SBIR open topic that falls under space, there is a significant piece of that the combat development teams have informed. So again, it's a very more formal way to set up Spark and understand and use the tools of Spark. But like I said earlier, SpaceWERX, we're kind of competitive with our big brother, the Air Force, and trying to like really scale and do things better. But challenge that guy, Major Lauber, to do more with the Spark cells. So we talk, we share lessons learned. I like to think of Space Force, SpaceWERX as a test bed to try things out and scale across the Department of the Air Force.
Awesome. Thank you so incredibly much. If we can give a round of applause. Rock, Phil, thank you. Absolutely a blast. Great job. Thank you so much. So incredible.